Hi. Last lesson we were looking at the first uprisings of 1066 to 1068, and this lesson we shall be looking at the rebellions in the north starting in 1068 going up to 1069, 1070. Now the key question of course is, how did William take full control of England in those first few years after he became king? Whether he just used force or whether he used more pleasant methods of taking control. Just a recap of last lesson. So those were the early uprisings. See, Edgar led the resistance even before William was crowned. Then after that there was Edric the Wild at Hereford and Geitha down in Exeter. But by Easter 1068 William felt safe enough to get his wife to come over from Normandy to join him. He felt he had just about befriended the English lords enough that it was all going to calm down. But William had got it wrong. The Anglo-Saxons kept fighting, and so what we need to look at are the reasons for the English to rebel against William. The first reason is revenge. Quite simply revenge for the deaths at the Battle of Hastings, for the destruction from the harrying around London straight after Hastings. So many families were angry with the treatment they'd received. The second reason is loss of land and power. Now, if the Anglo-Saxons that had fought against William at Hastings had had their land confiscated, as had Geitha after her resistance at Exeter. But for most of the others, they were allowed to keep some land, but not exactly the same amount. For example, the brothers Earls Edwin and Morcar were allowed to keep some land, but they weren't as powerful as before, and they were angry about this. Also, of course, William had promised Earl Edwin William's daughter's hand in marriage, which had never come to pass, so that was another reason giving Edwin a source of anger. He certainly wasn't being given the power and status that William had promised. The next reason is high taxation. Now, of course, the English paid tax before the Normans arrived, but William had to pay for his invasion somehow. He had to pay for all the mercenary soldiers that he'd employed, and the best way of doing this that he could see was increasing taxes on the English. The final reason for rebelling against William is just simple dislike for the new style of the people ruling the country. Obviously they spoke a different language, but also their methods were different. This use of castles, castle building everywhere, was a shock to the Anglo-Saxons. They became a symbol of everything that the Anglo-Saxons hated about the Normans. They were the basis for Norman knights to ride out and harry and destroy the local area before riding back to hide behind their high castle walls. So another reason for the English to rebel. So today we're looking at the rebellions in the north of 1068, 1069 and going into 1070. Now, the first was in the summer of 1068. All of them take place up in the north of England. Now, the first one is jointly led by Edgar the Atheling, who seems to have been helped by the Scottish king Malcolm III, but also Edwin and Morcar. Now, Edgar wants to have the crown on his head, but Edwin and Morcar aren't quite so bothered who's on the throne. They just want to get their proper lands and power back. So they're really trying to put pressure on William to stick to his promises and give them more land, and perhaps even William's daughter's hand in marriage, which had already been promised. The northern lords, people like Gospatrick, were also joining in, mainly to support Edgar's attempt to retake the throne. Now, William rushes up with an army, burning and pillaging as he goes, massive destruction, building castles. Indeed, it builds a castle at York, and Edgar flees back up to Scotland. Edward and Morcar submit to William, put themselves upon his mercy. William hoped that was enough, but it wasn't. The next year, February 1069, Edgar the Aetheling's back. This time, of course, once again with the Northern Lords' support and with help from the King of Scotland, but Edward and Morcar are absent this time. It seems that they have learnt their lesson. Once again, William rushes north. He builds another castle in York, so this is York's second castle, and uses massive violence to try to bring the northern rebels to heel. The leaders once again manage to flee to Scotland. We take a brief move away from the north to go back to the southwest. To add to William's woes, Harold's sons return. If you remember them, they had actually belatedly tried to attack North Somerset and Bristol, and they had failed. The local people had pushed them back, and they'd fled back to Ireland. Well, they're back again. They know this is a good time to attack because William's busy in the north of England. But William's appointed a very capable commander, Brian of Brittany, and he, with the help of Anglo-Saxon armies, fights Harold's sons, and they return to Ireland. Then, in September, the north goes up in flames again. Edgar the Aetheling's back, and this time he's got a Danish army. Sometimes when we say the Danes, we really mean the Vikings. Now, the Danish king was called Svein, and this army is led by his brother Asbjorn, and the northern lords like Gospatrick are up in arms again, and they really want to knock William off his throne. So, just when William thought it could not get any worse, there is another uprising. It's Edric the Wild is back in the Marcher lands once again. On top of this, there's more uprisings in the southwest, people attacking the walls of Exeter. And this is the low point for William. He's at his weakest. Many of his soldiers are deserting, running back to Normandy. This isn't what they signed up for. They thought it was going to be a much easier time of conquering England than this. And William's crown is under threat. He has a big decision to make. How is he once and for all going to deal with the rebels? Well, he does what you'd expect. Extreme violence, but this time he takes it up a level. In each case, his army are extremely ruthless and violent with the way they deal with the rebels. He increases his castle building. He built one castle in York the first time he had to go up north, and there's another one the second time he went up north. The Danes, in fact, burnt them down. But it's not just violence. He knows that the Danes famously are very happy to go back to Denmark if they're paid, and he paid them off. They went home. So there's an example of him using something other than violence. And then the final thing is this strange phrase, the harrying of the north. Now, this is one of the most infamous or terrible events that's happened on English soil. Certainly with the way that English people were massacred at the hands of their own king. Now, William carries out an intentional policy of starvation, using starvation to kill his own people. If you read through the source on the right, you can see a bit of more detail about it. But the key is, he didn't just kill the rebels. He killed everyone who had helped them. But also, he tried to destroy all their food, not just the food for that summer, but the following winter, but the actual crops, by putting salt in the soil to stop crops growing for the next year. Now, without a harvest, people would starve. And it's believed that at least 100,000 people died in this what has become known as the harrying of the North. Now, when you think the population was only a little over 1 million, then it shows what a massive proportion of the population suffered as a result of the harrying of the North.